Well, Alan, guess what? It's our nation's birthday.
Yes, it is.
What's the date now?
July 4th, 2021.
2021, that's right.
This is actually the third take. He messed up the first two, so, you know.
Oh, we're out here today because we love America, and it is our nation's birthday. So you're going to see behind us the revelers coming. We're about a half a mile away from our civic center where lots of people are gathered today, as it should be, unlike last year where we didn't gather. And so now we're thumbs up, gathering together. And as America's birthday is here, we wanted to do a couple of things. First one is we want to talk about what makes July the 4th, 1776 unique and special. Why was it different? And Alan, I was just thinking about today that the revolution in America, that revolutions weren't unique, right? They had lots of revolutions.
Oh yeah,
Lots
always.
of them. What were most of them for?
Just to change from one monarchy to the other.
From one monarchy to another, or maybe just to extract some concessions from the monarch, some pittance of rights that would be better after the fight than before. But this revolution, the American one, was different in that they didn't just want to improve a little small step. They wanted to change everything. And instead of being overturning a monarch, we wanted to put us, the people, in charge. Not just overturning some old way and modifying it, but a brand new way. And this was a revolutionary idea.
Oh yes.
That's why it was the shot heard round the world. And it had kind of three pillars to this declaration that Alan told me. The one that Thomas Jefferson drafted and the founders on July 4th signed. You can see all their signatures right there. That the first of these three pillars is that all men are created equal. Now, on a day like this, Alan, did the king think, back then, did the king think he was on equal terms?
No, he was not on equal terms. He was the right hand of God in the way that most of them thought, and they were more valuable than the peasants that they ruled over.
Yeah, the king was better. How about the lords and landowners? Did they think they were on equal terms with the peasants?
No, we were subjects to them. Nothing more than a farm implement.
The lords and ladies, whoever had the power and the control of the day, they didn't view each other as equals. And what we don't want now under this freedom is to view someone as unequal or different because of some immutable characteristic, right? It's not that you were born a lord or lady in the monarchy's line, or born a part of the royal court, or that you're a special skin color or ethnic origin. That's not what's important. What's important is that we're born under the image of God, and that our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence said this. There it is, a report around the world that all men are created equal. That's what it said. And what did it say next, Alan, about after all men are created equal? That they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those are
life, liberty, and the pursuit, not happiness, the pursuit of happiness.
The pursuit of happiness. This is a revolutionary idea. This was the first constitution, the first country pursuing that the government was here to protect rights, not granted by the government, but given by God himself. That people are given dignity from our identity from God, and from there we get these rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, life means the king, the monarch, can't take your life, nor the government. That means that your liberty, your freedom, your ability to sink or swim is yours, not someone else's. And then your pursuit of happiness. Alan, why is a pursuit better than just granting happiness by the government?
Well, I think the reason they did that is because they understood that we have the right to write our own destiny. That's not something that somebody else gets to do, and they don't get to decide what happiness is, because your happiness is not my happiness. I live with 7 dogs. Most people are like, that's freaking crazy. I love it though. It makes me happy. Paul, on the other hand, man, look, barbecuing, good Lord, sure. I didn't know a man could own that many pits, but it makes him happy. So that's his pursuit of happiness, and my pursuit of happiness is different. And we don't have a king, we don't have a person on this earth telling us what our happiness is. We're allowed to pursue our own happiness.
Man, that is so true. we were given this right as individuals, not as a group, right? Just the high power group over here and the low one over here, or the gentry over here and the everyone else over there. No, it was, and it's individuals who, in this new system, this revolutionary system from the Declaration of Independence, right? My shirt has the words of the Declaration printed on it under the form of our flag. Alan's holding it with his 1776 shirt. It is so revolutionary because it's not that the government gives you these rights. It's not that the king gives you these rights. It's not that the Politburo gives you those rights. It's not that the bureaucracy gives you these rights. It's that God gave us these rights, and governments are instituted among men to preserve these rights. Now, the government instituted to preserve rights is also revolutionary. We may have the only constitution that has a government prohibiting what it cannot do. Our founding documents, this is the Bill of Rights right here. It says what the government cannot do, right? It says that that the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, and the freedom of assembly, and the freedom to redress the government for grievances, that Congress shall make no law prohibiting any of those things. That's the First Amendment. The Second Amendment's like it, that a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then the rest of the Bill of Rights does the same, right? What it tells us the government cannot do, that they are prohibited from seizing your life, your liberty, and your ability to pursue your happiness. Oh, what the government cannot do. And Alan, when this new freedom world was unleashed and the American people were springing forward, what happened as a result? What kind of impact has America made?
The amazing thing about the impact of America, one, our Constitution is the longest living document in the history of the world. No government document has ever stood this long in place. Governments have been replaced so much faster throughout history.
This is the Constitution enacted a dozen years later, 13 years later, after the Declaration of Independence.
And when we started heading in the direction of being an independent country, we pioneered for the rest of the world freedom and liberty, something that had never been known, something that had only been written about, something that people had only dreamed about and didn't even fully understand how to grasp because they had no reference for it. That's what it changed. It changed the rest of the world from that date on.
And we're not downing other countries and other people. We don't think that Americans, that we're better than the people who live in England that we came from, our closest brothers, or any other nation in the world. It's not that the people are different. It's that the system that embodies freedom and unleashes people to be free and to reap the rewards of your efforts is motivating, that incentives matter. And so within short order, America went from a fledgling country to a world power in 50 years. And we've led the world on innovation, creating new things, creating wealth, and then exporting freedom, not as an empire that goes and destroys others, but as a beacon of light that people can emulate. And that's so important to note that while we have a dominant military now, that wasn't the case before. And the way that America provided a beacon of liberty and freedom, and then the willingness to go to arms to beat the German Empire and the Japanese Empire in World War II, and to fight the Cold War against Stalinist Soviet Union. It just shows that the freedom that American people have allowed us to pursue our happiness, and as a result, it was our common good, right? When you get to pursue making a living, pursuing the arts that you like, it's not just that it helps you. What else does it do?
Well, I mean, it helps other people. It gives other people, through our entrepreneurship, other people, benefit and are able to get jobs and do things. And, and I'm sorry, the police driving by with the flashing lights were a little bit distracting for me. But it doesn't just benefit one person. That's the beauty of our freedom, is that it benefits everybody. And everybody has that same opportunity to pursue that freedom.
Yeah, when you create something that other people want, you get to have a free exchange of goods and services. You can go and be in someone's employ, and you trade your time for a wage. And as you build your skill, you can accumulate capital. You can open your own business or do whatever you like. Go on vacation, and all of that produces your happiness. And I'm holding this placard that you can see that just says freedom is better. It produces a better outcome than planned government control. It produces a better outcome than a feudal lord who rules over all his serfs. It produces a better outcome than a commune where the Politburo gets a more equal share than everyone else's equal share, right? Freedom is better. Now, America's had, did we start out in perfect shape, Alan? Did
No.
the founders live up to the ideals that they exposed?
No, they did not.
They did not. How are a couple ways that they didn't?
Well, I think one of the obvious ways that gets talked about the most is slavery. And I think that a lot of people, we tend to want to look back on the founding of our country through the lens of today without understanding the world that we lived in back then. And the reality is that we, and the thinkers on the other side of the pond in England, were leading the way. At the time our country was established, we were leading the way to abolish slavery. And this was the first time it had been talked about in recorded history. Before the American experiment, people didn't talk about abolishing slavery. It was just part of life. So, yes, we started off, it was horrendous. So many of the founding fathers almost walked out. It was hard for guys like, John Adams and some of our other founders to actually sign on to our Constitution because they really did disagree that we had not ended slavery. But they saw something. They saw that, you know what, we are not a perfect nation right now, but we know our ideals will lead to better things. And if we don't start now, we're just going to give it back to the kings and the queens that have never even questioned whether they have the right to own people or not. They feel like it is their right. And do we want to give them that power back? No. And that's why they move forward the way we move forward.
And it cost a lot, right? The Civil War was fought and at the price of 300,000 or 400,000 Union lives. The Union prevailed, defeated the South, and the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, it was a hard challenge for him, right? He had to suspend some constitutional liberties to execute that war. Are we happy about that? No. We're not happy about any of that today. We hold these truths that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to our great happiness now, that blight of our country has that chapter is closed. And again, at great peril, at cost to Union and Confederate soldiers, but the Union prevailed. We've also done other things. We've put shackles on our own liberty, our ability to pursue our happiness with excessive laws and constraints, and we've thought through maybe those weren't as good, and we've had different periods where we've fought against and for that. But at the end of the day, so far, we are the strongest and freest country in the world. We're the only nation that I'm aware of off the top of my head that's won all these large, difficult conflicts and shed lands at the end, not gain them. We
not
could have
built empires,
right,
but just spread freedom.
Yeah, we conquered Japan. We conquered Nazi Germany. We don't own those lands. Right? They're their own. They're our allies now. In fact, even the splitting of Nazi Germany into two, with the West taking West Germany and Stalin's Lenin, now Stalin's Russia taking the western half, showed a great metaphor, a painful one, of the difference between people who think freedom is better and countries like communist Russia, Soviet Union, that thought that central collectivism was better and that the state knew better for you and they could decide without your input about what you were going to do in your life. And well, I should have brought my copy of the Gulag Archipelago, which Alan and I have been reading.
Yes.
About Alexander Solzhenitsyn's treatise about the horrors of a political gulag that Russia or the Soviet Union instituted and imprisoned millions of its own citizens and killed millions of them as well, in an effort to squash your freedom to express your opinion, to have your own values. And that's not what 1776 stands for. 1776 stands that freedom is a better option. You get to pursue your freedom and your happiness. Oh, but freedom is messy, Alice. How is freedom messy in our world today?
I still think that, unfortunately, there's always going to be those times of, that balance, my freedom to acquire junk in my yard, which I don't do, by the way. But, if I did, would my neighbors like that? No. So there's always that. And I know that's a little trivial thing, but it was something I thought about today, that sometimes, in a polite society that, even in little things, but we have to remember our founding fathers didn't get involved in the trivial things. They did not sit there and think about trivial things and think about how to micromanage. They focused on the big things. And I look at today and the freedoms that we're potentially losing is people not understanding free speech.
Free speech.
We've got a royal coming over here and bashing us for free speech, not understanding it. And they don't understand it. They still have their power. They still have their freedom. They never lost it. They never had to worry about, basic things like we have to worry about. So for them, they don't understand basic rights because they don't think we have them. So they come over here, or people don't understand that as horrible as certain things that people say about other people and things that I personally would never say or words I would never use, you can't stop free speech because that stops the exchange of ideas. And the exchange of ideas is what led to the Western culture eradicating slavery. If it wasn't for guys like John Locke, Adam Smith, people that started talking about freedom well before there was freedom, then nobody's free. The thing that we all seem to forget is before America, very few people lived in freedom. Even if you were technically free, you weren't necessarily in chains and slavery. You were still owned by your lords. The lords of the land still dictated what you did and still chose whether you lived or died. You were not free. We all lived in chains. The American experiment was the first time in history that people started talking about freedom for everyone, not just for some people, but for everyone. And I think those are the things, people are, we're starting to not, tell people, well, you can't say that, we can't talk about that, or, and that's unacceptable. That's not what, that's just a basic way that when you don't communicate, you don't learn, and that's the kind of stuff that we, I look at and I think, why would we give that up? Why would we give that up?
It's so important that it was the top of the stack. This is the Bill of Rights again, and the First Amendment to the Constitution, which the founders, some of them debated that there should not be a Bill of Rights because everyone knows that unless we've enumerated a power and given it to the federal government, that those powers are reserved for the people in the states, which now seems antiquated, right? That's the 9th and 10th Amendments, what I just summarized for us. But the very first amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. It's the number one right, because if we can't speak our minds, then we can't have a free country. We can't have an idea. We'll have pent up frustrations that result in violence. And words aren't violence. Words are freeing, and even offensive speech, right? I may not like what someone says, but unless they're impinging on one of my rights, then they are free to do so. The number one amendment. First of all, we got the people came on the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, to have freedom of worship, right? To worship as we see fit. We are one nation under God, right? Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So they wanted that. They sought it out, and here we are. In the second one, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press. We don't need to have a place where if you say something that's unfashionable to someone else, that you get censored and restricted and called a persona non grata. That's not gonna work if you want to have freedom. Freedom is messy, but we can see that it's so much better. Freedom has produced fruit for us that the whole world sees. We lack perspective. I know, Alan, every time I get to meet someone who's immigrated here, and I met the guy who owns a local fast food franchise here, a bunch of units, and he immigrated here from India, and I sat with him over Christmas, and it was so refreshing to hear him talk about the ability to pursue his own happiness under this and how great it was. And again, he arrived here with no special privileges, no saved up money. He worked hard and pursued his dreams, and here he is, successful and happy and blessing others. We were celebrating our global, or our local charities that we all pitched in our own time and money, and you did as well, to feed our neighbors after these hurricanes that we had here. It was so much work. But freedom is messy, and we can't skip on these, right? This is what makes us a people and what makes the whole world want to come here. Alan, do you have any immigrants that you've met that kind of maybe give us perspective?
Yeah, I met two sisters that had came here from, they were technically Pakistani, but one thing I learned through them is that not everybody that's Pakistani wants to be Pakistani. They were actually part of India at one point, and they identify more as being, from India, but technically their passports say they're from Pakistan. But they were a family that when India gave the land to Pakistan, because they were of the wrong religion, not anything they had said, they were the wrong religion. Therefore, their land and everything they owned was stripped from the family. They lost everything and had to immigrate to America with nothing and start completely over.
Wow.
And it just struck me.
How did they feel about that?
I never personally got to meet their dad. I've met so many people that knew their dad and talking to them. I wish I had gotten a chance to meet their dad, because he was very grateful that he had the opportunity to come to America. He didn't focus on what happened in his past. He talked about it as something that happened, but the big part of his story was America, and the coming to America and living in a country where somebody can't just take your land because you're the wrong religion. We can all find these weird stories of the government coming in and taking somebody's land because of different reasons, and look, that's a discussion for another day, but as far as them coming and saying, hey, Paul, you're Catholic, and man, look, I'm Baptist, and you can't live next to me, so I'm just going to take your land. It doesn't work that way in this country, and it's something that we take for granted, that you don't have to worry about the government changing tomorrow. I mean, you wake up one day and you're in a totally different nation, and somebody takes all your stuff because you have no protection. You have no constitution that protects you. And that's, that was the thing that kind of struck me when I met those two sisters.
Wow.
And they shared their story.
Wow. The founders, I mentioned earlier that they put in the 9th and 10th Amendments that the federal government was restrained. It said that any responsibilities not expressly given to the federal government were reserved to the people in the states, and that any enumeration of rights, if they weren't enumerated, they were expressly reserved for the people in the states. So this is an idea of limiting government, not that the government not that we live at the whims of the government, but that the individuals who own the power, our God-given rights, freely give it by the consent of the governed to the government, and therefore the government must respect that. And I think today we have some times where we can get lost on that, and we start to believe that the government grants us our rights. And I think we've talked about that a lot so far in our conversation, but Alan, do any instances come to mind where we've just in our vocabulary as a modern culture that we've forgotten that those rights belong to us and we freely grant them to the government, not the other way around? Does any example come to mind for you when you're thinking about that?
Well, I mean, I can think of multiple examples, and one of the things that I think is kind of a hot topic. I don't know if we were planning on talking about this, but it kind of keeps going over in my head, is our Second Amendment. that we have given up so many of our rights, that we have, it is a right that local governments have no authority over. That it, zero. So when you live in Chicago and they tell you can't own a gun, guess what? They have zero rights to do that. They have zero rights to restrict whether you carry it. They have zero rights to restrict what you own, how many you own. But we give it up because we don't understand. We don't understand that our founding fathers, I'm just going to go off on a tangent here. I'm sorry, Paul. Look, I'm sorry. I know our present president has informed some of y'all that it started, we weren't allowed to own cannons, and there was always restrictions.
There's a howitzer right here, a big cannon behind us at Veterans
That's
Park.
actually not true. Actually, the federal government actually paid private people that own cannons for the use of their cannons. So we were allowed to own pretty much whatever we wanted from the founding, when we were founded. So they did, and I know we seem to somehow or another have gotten it really twisted that, at that point in time that these were some really stupid people that didn't understand weaponry. And the reality was, if you really research a musket, it was actually a lot more revolutionary and actually a bigger game changer than any AR would ever be. So you really need to study up your weaponry if you're not aware of that. So I think that's a right that we act like, in that maybe they didn't understand what they were giving us the power to do and the depravity of man. And I think our founding fathers better understood the depravity of man and how cruel we could be to each other than we ever do, because we live in a very civilized world. They lived in a very uncivilized world. They lived in a world that up until, once again, that we're pioneering the idea that people are valuable, that all people are valuable.
That's right.
Not some people, all people. So they lived in a world where only some people were valuable. So if a king decided that he wanted to string you up, cut you open, and spill your guts everywhere as a example to the rest of the commoners, well, guess what? That's what he did. So these people understood how cruel people was. They understood how dangerous what they were given us were, but they also understood that the only way to have a better life was for us to have that freedom, because that is given to us by God. God gives us that freedom. God gives us the freedom to make bad decisions, to make great decisions. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that will make bad decisions, but that is a God-given right.
And what's messy about freedom is that when we have people with sinful hearts, right? So we happen to be Christians and think that God's solution for salvation is through Jesus, getting a new heart. But if you have people who have sinful hearts, we can hate one another and have terrible thoughts. And again, we talked about the scourge of slavery and how horrible it was, and how it was such a painful war to be fought over that. But that didn't end racism, right? We had Jim Crow laws in the South where some people were given unequal treatment, and in the South it would be not uncommon if you were on the close-ups with the sheriff to be able to, if you were white, and then go do something terrible to a person because they were black and get away with it. That's horrible. I mean, we don't want any of that, and we celebrate every time an injustice is righted, right? If someone commits violence upon another and is not prosecuted, or a mob gets to rule with violence, that's shameful. That's what happened with the Ku Klux Klan, right? They would have mob rule and tyranny of people scared, and they would withhold telling the authorities because they know what would happen. You get your house burnt down the next day. And we don't need Jim Crow. We don't need Crow Jim. We don't need a reversal of that. We've got other groups that decide we're going to take matters in our own hands and go to the streets and have mob rule. We don't need any of that. You talked about the Second Amendment, right? That I'm holding the Bill of Rights again. It says that well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the real kind of crux of that was that liberty, your freedom, which is better, by the way, could be constrained really in mass only by government. And so that whether that government was a foreign power attempting to invade, which is what we typically think of with the militia, right? To repel a foreign invader, right? the country of Switzerland has mandated that people own weapons and are trained in them and have ammo at their houses to repel a foreign invader. But on the counter stance, if a domestic right remover was in place, right, whether that be a tyrannical government or a mob, whichever one, that the people who are armed can resist and defeat this enemy who would steal away their rights. Alan, when we were reading the Gulag Archipelago, did any of the people who were politically unfavored by Lenin have arms to stop these invaders before they hauled them off to the Gulag?
No, they were had been completely disarmed, had no freedom of speech. I remember, there's a section in the book where he talks about how they had a dignitary there speaking, and everybody's clapping, and so they just
if
kept
you've read
clapping.
the book, you know this. Yeah.
And he just and nobody wants to be the first one to stop clapping, because sure enough, the first guy to stop clapping ends up in the Gulag. And
it was a factory owner. He had been a factory owner. And he was prideful enough to be the first one to stop. How long did it take? Do you remember how many minutes?
They said like 5 minutes they had been clapping when he finally stopped. And, I know, tying back into the freedom of speech, what choice do you have? You can't speak out. You have no way to defend yourself. So you're stuck with these arbitrary rules that are constantly changing, and you just end up in jail. And just because, this was a guy that was a supporter of the Communist Party. This was not a person that had dissented. This is a person that was on their side that made the mistake of stopping clapping.
So it was common in Soviet Russia to have so many rules that the political commissars could just walk in the room and arbitrarily pick, you were breaking some rule. And if everything's illegal, then it's now to the prosecutor's discretion. So if you're out of political favor, you get prosecuted. If you're in political favor, you get away with it. Again, we didn't like that in the Jim Crow South. That's horrible and evil blight to be removed, and we don't want it anywhere. And so that those two rights, the right to have freedom of speech, to assemble, to discuss, even to debate, even things that we think are untoward or destructive, that's valuable. That's how you grow as a people. That's how freedom works. If you don't have that, you have central control, right? Either we grant government permission by the consent of the governed, or what is the other alternative?
The alternative is tyranny. Tyranny.
It's tyranny from a bureaucracy. It's tyranny from a king. It's tyranny from the oligarchy. None of those are good, right? You can have I'm reading another book called Last Stands, Why Men Fight When All Is Lost. And they said when the Chinese fought against us in South Korea, that they had 3 waves. First wave had guns. The second wave would pick up the guns from the dead guys. And the third wave was political commissars with burp guns to shoot anybody who was thinking twice about it. That's not what a free people do, right? Free people pursue justice as a community because we know that it's better.
One thing, and I don't mean to cut you off, but something that you just keep saying, an idea just keeps coming to my mind about the size of our military and our power. Throughout history, governments, monarchies became more powerful by taking over people and assimilating, or through treaties and I'll give you land if you give me your people. We're not the world's largest military in history because we took over lands. We're that because we didn't take over lands, because we brought about an idea that brings people to our country. The myth that right now that there are people that this is a horrible place to be and like there's better places. You really need to look up the facts of immigration and where everybody wants to be. And that's not to say that we are better as people. Like Paul said, this is not about the people. It's about
freedom.
Freedom is better. It's about the fact that people understand that when faced with tyranny or freedom, people want to choose freedom. the myth that we're going to be better living under tyrannical governments, or if we just give up more of our rights that things will be better. It doesn't work that way. It never works that way. It's never worked that way in history, ever. Every single time you either have freedom or you have tyranny. It never ends up where tyranny leads to better living. And I just, when you said that about the size of our military, it just kind of hit me. We didn't get that size. We didn't conquer. We went, like you said, in World War II, we could have easily stuck out of that war. We probably shouldn't have been in World War I. Maybe a discussion for another day. That's something I've kind of, I've got some crazy ideas. But, we end up in World War II, even though we don't want to be there. Like, we absolutely did not want to be in World War II. Had no real desire. Had done everything we could to stay out of it. I still believe if it wasn't for the persuasion of Winston Churchill on Roosevelt, I don't know where the world would have ended up, because, if you understand anything about World War II and how Hitler was advancing in the Atlantic Wall, had we not got in when we did, how would we have stopped them? So, and even in that situation where we are in the same area that we've lost lives in, just not even a generation before, we're still in the same generation remembering, hey, wait, weren't we just over there? And there had to be a strong pull to say, hey, why don't we just, annex it, as a modern term. We're just going to annex. We didn't do that because that's not who we are. From our first day, our founders wanted our freedom to only be exported organically, not through force, because they understood there is freedom and there is tyranny. There is no in between.
So on our nation's birthday, these 240 something years ago, we celebrate that freedom is better. The shot heard around the world that we love our country. We hope that other people around the world love their country, especially if it's a great one, right? If it's not a great one, well then pursue freedom and use your speech to persuade others, and use your life to bless your neighbor, right? After our hurricane, I came up with our 3 slogans for me: that America is strong because we trust our God, we help our neighbors, and we love our country. And so today, on July the 4th, 1776's birthday, it's a great day to love our country. Oh, Alan, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And I love how the Declaration of Independence was signed by, at the very end, there was, I'll do it from memory, I think there was 48 men who signed the Declaration. 42 of them are pictured on the back of a $2 bill. If you have a $2 bill handy, I collect $2 bills. I have a bunch of them. I'm going to paint a wall with them or decorate a wall with them. But it says, in support of this document, these men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Now, again, they were not perfect men. We don't mean to say that. I mean, they had flaws, some of which we've already talked about, which are glaring, but they were pursuing this goal of freedom, and we are the benefactors of it today. And those guys, it all cost them something. This was a first revolution by wealthy people who did not need this freedom, right? They were already set.
They were offered lands and title by England to not fight a war. They could have gained what most people did in revolutions, more wealth for themselves, and left people living in suffrage.
But all of them suffered greatly. Many of the signers died. Again, most of them entered that document with wealth and left it in poverty. And that's because they were pursuing this goal of freedom is better. And so today on their birthday, we celebrate that. We love you. We love America. Freedom is better.
Freedom is better.
Happy 4th of July.